This podcast is a political advertisement paid for by the Collin County Democratic Party. The discussions and opinions expressed are those of the participants. Welcome to the Collin County Democratic Party podcast. I'm your host, Scott Riggle.
I'm Sudhir Joshi, the Communications Director for the Collin County Democratic Party.
And I'm Barb Walters, Vice Chair for the Collin County Democratic Party.
Okay, so it's been a while since our last podcast, guys. We had some technological difficulties, but as you can see, we are back and ready to go. We are simultaneously recording a videocast via Facebook Live right now, so be sure to tell your friends as we're doing it right now. And it will also upload this to our YouTube channel. In order to find the YouTube channel, you can just search Collin County Democratic Party and then be sure to click subscribe so you can start following us. We're also very excited to have everyone back and are gearing up for the upcoming municipal elections and, of course, the 2020 elections. Speaking of which, Sudhir, can you walk us through with how things are going with the party right now?
Sure. The things that with the party are going great. We had a fantastic turnout for the last election. We, in Texas overall, Beto at the top of the ticket lost by 3 points.
Which was
which was a 6-point improvement. Hillary lost by 9, and Beto lost by 6. Lost by 3. In Collin County, he lost by 6. So we made a good improvement from the last cycle, and we feel like the momentum is in our favor.
Right.
So the party leadership feels like we have the processes and the methods in place to take the next step and really win in 2020, win at the top of the ticket. And of course, it'll all depend on who runs. But we're really excited. Most of the leadership has agreed to stay through the 2020 cycle.
Consistency will be key for us. Yeah.
Consistency will be good because we'll have the same people. We are, for those listening to the podcast, we are always looking for people to come into the party and take on leadership roles in the future. And also, we are currently looking for someone, 3 people. We're looking for someone to chair the Coordinated Campaign Committee. We are looking for an events chair and a secretary for the party. So if anyone's interested, there's a volunteer form on our website. You can fill that out. And
do you and Barb, what do those jobs entail?
Well, the Coordinated Campaign Committee is very election cycle specific, and that person would organize both candidates and campaign workers and volunteers to coordinate campaigns. So every candidate runs their own campaign to win, but also having that coordinated effort, which can be combining resources, and money is one of those resources, et cetera. So trying to get them to coordinate and get us to win.
Wonderful. Great. All right, guys, so we have a great episode for you. We'll interview, of course, our guest, Barb Walters, who's our vice chair. So we're very excited to have her on today about her work on the Civil Rights Commission and its effects on all voters. Stick around, y'all. Okay, so we're here with our vice chair, Barb Walters, to talk with her about her work on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. How are you today, Barb?
I'm fine, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for joining us and
Sure.
taking a Saturday to come in and talk about your wonderful work that you've been doing. Can you start off about how you became involved with the commission?
Sure, and it was actually as long ago as 2006, and I still don't recall who suggested my name, but the the Commission on Civil Rights, it was established by the Civil Rights Act back in 1957, and it is a bipartisan independent group that is there to advise the president and Congress on civil rights and reporting, and they report annually on that. So I got asked to serve on the State Advisory Council or committee, and there's 50 plus 1 within Washington, D.C. And we look at all the list of potential civil rights and whether we think there's something that's worth studying. Just quickly, for example, when in 2008, we were on human trafficking, and we have a report that's been published. We've done one on school discipline, and have found clearly there's discrimination.
Right.
But lately, and just recently, we have done a probe into voting rights. And there are 12 different SACs or I keep saying state advisory councils that were also looking into the voting rights investigation, contributing to a national report, because the commission itself did an assessment of minority voting rights access and definitely found deficiencies. And a lot of this was very specific to the fact that some people know the Shelby County versus Holder decision that had to do with the rescinding the Voting Rights Act.
That's
of
where the
65.
Supreme Court said
Racism
is over.
Yeah, it's unconstitutional.
Anymore.
Judge Roberts says it's unconstitutional. We don't need it. And we had dissenters like Ginsburg and Sotomayor and others. But what has been the impact from that? And so that was our concern, is what's going on. And amazingly, or maybe not surprisingly, we found that there were incredible amounts of new voting restrictions that started coming up because they could, and different legislators were coming up with it. So after the 2010 election, for example, state lawmakers nationwide started introducing hundreds of harsher measures, making it harder to vote. The new laws range from strict photo ID laws, which we're very aware of, to early voting cutbacks, you might have heard about, to registration restrictions. 25 states put new restrictions in place, and 14 of them were even more restrictive on voter ID. And of course, Texas was one of them in 2016 as well, that had 14 states, of the 14 states that had these new restrictions, even for the first time in a presidential election. So it continued. I mean, in 2017, more states in concern, and we passed a new voter ID law in 2016 in Texas, and so on.
Well, I think we should mention that this was all done in Republican-controlled states.
Yes,
Right.
It was.
It wasn't done in where we had Democratic governors and
Sure.
legislatures. That this was done in Republican-controlled states, including Texas.
Well, in North Carolina, didn't they targeted African American communities to restrict early voting, and correct me if I'm wrong, early voting on Sundays, because they predominantly vote after church.
Right.
At least in North Carolina, yeah.
Many different kinds of restrictions. The councils, the 12 that I mentioned, not all blue, but the ones who said we want to look into these investigations were Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, California, blue, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Maine, New Hampshire, Ohio, and Texas. But this is up to that state advisory council being willing to go do that for that committee. But yeah, you can tell that a lot of them are probably a little more on the progressive side. But it so happened in this whole last year. So this starting in October of 2018, the Commission on Civil Rights was saying, we actually kind of bought into what they were saying, that indeed these were happening. And we decided as a committee, it's very well balanced. They really are sticklers for identifying our backgrounds and Republican, Democrat, and so on. And we got to come up with whatever issue we wanted to study, and we were unanimous on doing the voting rights. And what we did was then in January of 19 was when the full commission, the United States Commission on Civil Rights, said they said they had key findings about minority voting rights access being limited, and they felt it was a very significant reason was this rescinding of the Voting Rights Act. But it had things like constructing barriers by the state and local jurisdictions that block a citizen's right to vote. So we went right along with that and decided to look at what we could do to restore those kinds of issues. And by law, we are all what we are allowed to do is do the studying of it. We're authorized to advise the commission in writing about it. So at this point, we have had a briefing, and this was March 13th of this last year, of 2018. Obviously, it's March 13th. And we met University of Houston, in fact, and convened. It was a public hearing to hear testimony regarding these potential barriers in the state of Texas. So we focused on that, and we're consolidating our report with those others. But here's another thing too. We tried very hard to look at the topics and the panels and the representation, and we went to great lengths to solicit participation from stakeholders representing diverse perspectives. having participation from your more conservative-leaning lawmakers, and to a person they refused to take part in it. So they would not even have, give us the contribution to a United States Commission on what was going on.
So they just have a bunch of empty chairs there?
Well, we didn't do that, but our commission was in effect the panel at the front of the room, and then there were briefings by, the 3 areas were voter registration, what kinds of issues or problems do they have there, access to polling locations, which have changed considerably, and then language access. And so we did, again, multiple attempts to try to get people to come up. There was Senator Birdwell, Senator Betancourt, Jody Laubenberg, our really, familiar, Representative Joe Strauss even, and the Attorney General. And then there's a group called True the Vote that tends to be conservative, and one called Direct Action Texas, but none of them would join our committee and come for the hearings. So we put together and transcribed and have published and will continue to disseminate our findings on those 3 areas, and it has been pretty significant what we have determined, and our report does show the recommendations that we're suggesting in each of those areas. Let me get to that page. Let's see. Okay. So it had to do with stricter voter ID laws, closing of polling places, cutting down on early voting time, which you've already mentioned.
These are Texas specific?
Well, they're not Texas specific, but we found evidence of all of those from the people who were reporting, and voting roll purges. So the Shelby County case, by counting it, considering it unconstitutional, it halted the federal pre-clearance regime, and that was that you had to, if you made any changes in the laws, you had to go and get permission, basically, pre-clearance. They decided, no, we don't need that anymore. Under these laws, the court was intentionally discriminatory against communities of color. That was what we had felt was what Shelby was in place for. And they really were just saying, no, that's over with. It's unconstitutional. We don't need to do anything with that. So the pre-clearance restrictions were all taken away. So I have the examples, which I've lost. Sorry, just a minute.
It's all good.
One of the things we can add while she's looking for that is this is one of the reasons that the first bill, H.R. 1, in the House this session of the new Congress is all about voting rights. Now, of course, it's going through committee and it'll get deliberated. And
this was the same one where Mitch McConnell did that impassioned.
It's a power grab.
Yeah,
right.
About Democratic power grab, and federal workers shouldn't get a day off to go vote, and just showed really just how cynical and out of touch he is.
Yeah, so that's how nationwide the problem is. That, the first thing this new Democratic House wanted to address was voting rights. And of course, we still have a Republican Senate. So, but at least the legislation is getting the attention, and people should know that it's the Republicans who are blocking the voting, everyone's voting rights.
Right. I thought it was a brilliant move.
They have no interest in letting every eligible citizen vote, in just making things easier, like making the election day a holiday, or moving it to Saturday. They have no interest in that because it's not in their. They can't win on the issues.
No.
Yeah, like one I mentioned, voter registration was one of the key areas, and only 68%. This is Texas. Only 68% of those who are eligible to be registered voter are registered. So 68%, and we're 44th in the worst state for voter registration in the 2016 election. Okay, and the testimony from our organizations as we did that indicated there is a low and disparate registration rate, partially due to the state's restrictions on third-party voter registration activities, such as a voter registration drive. And our volunteer deputy registrars, and we're making a huge effort in Collin County to try to deputize volunteers to register voters. Because if you think you either have to drive up to McKinney during business hours 8 to 5 to say, I want to register to vote, or you have to find a place, which might be a post office, it might be a library, who knows, that has a white mail-in form to register, or you do the motor voter, and they found quite a scandalous reality that was not working, and it's better. But in fact, now at least the elections office in our county has a DMV database specialist sitting there, and if somebody comes up and says, well, but I checked the box when I did my license, they verify. And if they find that box was checked, they'll let them vote. But this was our pressure, not the civil rights pressure, but the pressure of the citizens to do that. But a volunteer deputy registrar, for example, has to be certified in a county in which they want to register voters. It's not, and you can get dual certified, but it's not statewide. Yeah. And then place like, where do you get trained for that? Well, our elections department will train us. They have to be the ones to train us, but they won't come out and train us. In Bexar County, or Harris County, they have trainings available in Spanish and English, and that has helped. But in Bexar County, they offer 1 day of training per month, and only during business hours, and only in English.
And Bexar County's in the San Antonio
area, right?
Pretty high Spanish-speaking area.
Yeah. So the law dictates that these VDR certifications expire every 2 years. So then, as of this January, no one was certified. We all had to get redeputized.
I know my mom is actually getting League of Women Voters through League of Women Voters.
Right.
She's getting deputized. So she's really, really excited about that.
Right. And then there's laws requiring that there's a receipt, that you issue a receipt to the voter with each transaction, but there's no standardized procedures around that. So then there's some questions. Another thing, in Bexar County, as I mentioned, they had 1,000 VDRs registering voters in a city of 1.5 million people. That was it. And then Latino voters. Okay, so that's another issue. 1.5 million in 1980 are now 5.2 million in 2016 Latino voters, but they're less likely to be registered to vote because of the, especially there's no one speaking Spanish and helping them out with that. They're not always, in fact, they don't even not only provide the training in Spanish, but they don't necessarily have the documentation or the handouts, the registration forms in Spanish. I mean, we do, but it's just low. It's just a low registration rates. They're associated with also mistrust, with fear, with apathy, we know. Then the next thing is the information regarding registration deadlines. Understanding it's 30 days before Election Day. That's not very clearly done. A citizen who moves from one county to another has problems. They don't realize they have to update their registration. They're not, and the forms, as I mentioned, aren't always readily available. The DPS is not helping out with their online. There's not really online certification to when you go for a license, you can do your online renewal up to a point with the Department of Public Safety, but not for changing and online renewing your registration. If you need to do that in terms of your voter registration doesn't expire as long as you don't move out of county, right? High schools, that's another really big deal. A lot of people don't realize that high schools, by law, must have a high school deputy registrar on campus designated on their staff, not just...
not a lot of high schools have that.
Yeah, and they don't. And they're required twice a year to designate this person and do some kind of voter registration drive or something as seniors age into the process. And we found that there's roughly 330,000 young people who graduate from Texas schools each year. They could be registered to vote, and they aren't.
330?
30,000, yeah.
Wow.
Too few of the roughly 330,000 young people who graduate from Texas public schools each year are just not getting registered to vote. And they should be able to do that.
I know that a lot of that too is with Ken Paxton and some of the other officials in power of they're just intimidating teachers, trying to confuse them and say they're not necessarily educating them the difference between being active in civics versus being active in a political party.
Sure, yeah. And there's not even just that. What we preach in the Collin County Party, and we do supplemental training, which I'm very proud of. We go beyond in terms of what we train the poll workers, and we just say everybody votes. You can step off a plane from Alaska and you come in, and we probably know your vote won't count, but if you're there, you will get a provisional vote, and it will be up to a ballot board to say it doesn't count. But we're not saying you cannot vote. And that is not a common practice among all the people that would be working polls. That's what we preach out of the Collin office, the Democratic Party office. College students face barriers and polling locations. There's a lot of things there. A shortage of them that are convenient to a college campus. You have a lot of transportation issues. There are also some polling places, not just about young people, but they're intimidating locations like a sheriff's office or a law enforcement office, and that could very much discourage marginalized communities from going there to vote. A lot of them, they've changed their process in the polling locations and disenfranchised voters. Oh, there's also, let's say you need to change a polling location for whatever reason. You only have to have 72-hour notice to let the public know that polling place is no longer a polling place. 72 hours. And that's just not enough in a last-minute changes. Tremendous confusion. And then vote centers, a lot of people don't even realize they're vote centers. Collin is fortunate that we are, and that means that during the whole 12 days of early voting, you can vote anywhere, but also on election day, you can vote anywhere. Not so in Dallas and Denton, our neighboring counties. They have to, on election day, know where to vote. Right. And there should be a statewide effort to just say, just be vote counties, vote centers. Just do that, and that's not happening.
I know with friends that live in Collin County that's always something that they're always surprised to learn. Like, oh, I can go anywhere on election day, right, or I can go anywhere during early voting, but I have to go to my location on election day. Like, no, go anywhere, just go vote.
Yeah, and under the Voting Rights Act, there used to be polling relocations that were denied under that Voting Rights Act because they didn't have pre-clearance requirements. Those now have been implemented after the Shelby decision. So they can just say, too bad, and they're clearly finding that they're discriminatory for African American and Latino voters. So it really has had an impact having that.
Well, once again, that's all the time we have for this episode. Special thanks to Barb Walters for joining us today. Tune in for our next episode where we'll be interviewing another great and amazing guest. But before we go, Barb, Sadir, do we have any quick announcements for our listeners about upcoming events and news?
I did want to mention that the elections office has, for Collin County, come up with approval for new voting machines. Ooh. This was passed by the county commissioners, and many people were invited to public viewing, and people are excited that it will actually have a paper trail, which is something people have been wanting. And the great news, they won't be used until November, and then obviously for 2020, but we are going to have a couple of the machines in our party office in Plano in probably the next couple of weeks. I would recommend maybe checking with us before you come by. But right, we want to show them off, let you have a feel with them. You'll be able to play with them, vote, craziness, and just really have a good understanding of them before you get into the voting booth for real.
Good.
Another thing is that on March 7th, Thursday night coming up next week, or week from 2 weeks, I guess. It's still February. But we're having a fundraiser. It's a wine tasting at Landon's Winery. It's on the square in McKinney. We've had them here before and had a lot of enjoyment, and a lot of people have enjoyed going in for some wine tasting. It is, you can sign up for it on the Collin County Democrats or collindemocrats.org website, and just go in and to donate and sign up for this wine tasting. We'd love to have you there.
Great. Well, Barb, once again, thanks so much for taking the time I know you're extremely busy on a Saturday to come in and join us. Thanks for listening. I'm Scott Riggle.
And I'm Sadir Joshi.
And I'm Barb Walters. Thanks.
And if you have any questions or comments, please send them to podcast@collindemocrats.org. And always, guys, be sure to tell a friend and come and hear it.